I want to share in this church leader tool an interesting idea called a leadership pipeline. A leadership pipeline. But before I do that, let me just remind us of the great importance of leadership. Leadership is so important in the life of our congregations, our churches, and also important outside. So a church should not only be helping leaders grow to further the ministry within the church, but it also furthers it outside in volunteer activities, in workplaces, in homes. Nothing really important happens without some leaders instigating that. So a church needs to be a place where leaders are built up. So one way to think about this is a leadership pipeline. And I'm going to explain more about what that is. The pipeline metaphor was first used by sales folks as they were thinking about moving someone from no knowledge of their products all the way to being a great fan of them. Let's use an example like Apple. Taking someone who maybe at the beginning didn't even know about Apple or didn't know what they made, all the way to an Apple fanatic who stands in line overnight to get the newest iPhone. That could be thought of as a pipeline, moving a customer from one stage along to the next as they become more and more interested and connected with a product. Well, some folks started talking about a leadership pipeline, moving folks along in their leadership. Now, I'm going to say right up front, I know for some folks, the idea of a pipeline might not work, and it's just a metaphor. It has some advantages, which I'll mention later, but if you don't like that idea, call it a leadership process, or a leadership system, or a leadership pathway. But the idea of helping people grow as leaders is important. Now, one idea that I really like, and in the show notes, there is a link to an interview with Todd Atkins, where he describes that a leadership pipeline is both poetry and plumbing. It's both at the same time. And by poetry, he means the language and the way we describe the leadership pipeline, but it also is plumbing, it also is mechanics, it also is logical next steps. So it needs to have both of those, poetry and plumbing. Now, one of the things in that particular podcast that really pinned me down and started me thinking about this was he asks the question, if you were to list the 20 most important things that you do, the things that really have value in your organization, and that would be no matter what you do, and then make a column next to them, and in the first column have do, and in the second column develop. He notes, and I know this personally, that I do a lot more doing than I do developing. And the idea of a leadership pipeline is to say, how can we do some more developing? So let me give you some basic thoughts about a leadership pipeline. First, keep it flowing. We want to keep folks growing in their leadership. We want them to continue to be developed. It's one of the reasons I like the idea of a pipeline, because we want to keep it flowing. We don't want any clogs along the way, and we'll talk more about that. A second, it should be flexible, a pipeline. We want it to be individualized when necessary, but at least we have a beginning step to this. Let me use a different example that might be helpful. We have a welcome pipeline, or we call it our welcome system or welcome process in my church. And there are 14 different steps along that process to help people feel welcome in the life of the church. I customize it all the time for the individual place that somebody is in. But having an idea of where that next step is then allows me to be flexible within this. So a third thing is a good pipeline is documented and repeatable. By documented, I mean it's written down so that others know what it is, and it's repeatable if you don't happen to be around. If you change ministries or you get hit by a bus, is one of my examples, somebody else should be able to pick this up and continue this along. A lot of leadership pipelines, and most, I think, include some knowledge, some learning, helping people learn more about leadership. They also include some experience. If you have a lot of knowledge of leadership, but you never get to use that, that's not as helpful. So it should have some experience of being in leadership, and then some coaching, some mentoring, some encouraging as we're in the experience of leadership. A good leadership pipeline also takes into account succession. That is, who will replace you? How will the next generation of leaders come along? And I may actually do a church leader tool in the near future just on succession. It also should be able and should be reviewed. It's one of the great things about having it written down. You can pull it out, share it with folks, and then look at it and improve the pipeline. And last, I mentioned already the idea of a clog or also a valve. And these are places that a natural place of getting stopped along the way. And as I said before, if you don't like pipeline, then maybe pathway and it's obstacles or gates in the way. It's those things that get in the way either accidentally like a clog or on purpose because we've closed a valve and we need to open that up. So that this is maybe a little bit more clear, let me list some examples of clogs or valves that might exist in your church pipeline that you can reflect on. One of those is, how would you involve a guest? How would you involve someone who is just beginning to attend your congregation? How can you move them along and help them find a place that they can use their leadership and grow in experience in the church? Second, where are some places where teaching could be done? Are there meetings, church council meetings or leadership meetings where the knowledge piece can be shared, or videos or other resources that can be shared? How is delegation taking place? That would be from the pastor and the key leaders all the way down. And I would highlight that there is a church leader tool, in fact, a 3-part tool on delegation. So how is delegation taking place? How are people able to sign up for ministry and get involved in leadership opportunities? Do we make that easy in our setting? What is our nominating process? That could be for church council, and it could also be for other teams or committees in your church. Just as an example, in my context, we weren't having as many people enter into our teams. So a team sat down and brainstormed about how to improve that process, that part of the pipeline. And then, how is discipling taking place, both from the pastor and other key leaders all the way down? How are people investing in helping others grow as disciples? Because growing as a disciple is also growing as a leader. And how about lay ministry teams? Is there a process to develop lay ministry teams, like folks who visit or folks who help to lead in worship? And you probably noticed I'm going through different steps in the pipeline, and all the way at the end of the pipeline, how are we developing the next generation of pastors and church leaders? Some places along the pipeline. I hope this gives you some things to think on in your context, and as always, there's a description section that has some articles to go deeper and some discussion questions that you can use to reflect on this more deeply with the leaders around you, and always pass it along to somebody else you think this might be helpful for. Take care and God bless.